Forget the F-22 Raptor. Forget the B-2 Spirit. Today, we are exposing the absolute most underrated US aircraft ever built, war machines so utterly devastating, so unapologetically lethal, and inherently dangerous that history actively tried to bury their legacy. You are about to witness the classified nightmares of the skies, the unsung predators that bathed battlefields in fire, while the world looked the other way. As the ultimate authority on aerial lethality, I am tearing apart the modern military archives of 2026 to bring you the raw, unfiltered truth that no other channel has ever dared to compile. By the end of this deep dive analysis, everything you thought you knew about American air superiority will be shattered. Do not click away. Watch this video until the very last second, because the final aircraft on this list is a literal death trap that forever changed the psychology of modern warfare. If you crave the undisputed, hardcore truth of military aviation, smash that subscribe button right now, drop a like to feed the algorithm, and let me know in the comments which of these beasts terrifies you the most. Let's dissect the monsters. Number 1, the F-111 Aardvark, the Whispering Death. The name, General Dynamics F-111 Aardvark. The purpose, all-weather, low-level, supersonic medium bomber and tactical strike aircraft. The deep dive analysis, why it was unstoppably deadly. By 2026 standards, we rely on stealth coatings and hypersonic missiles. But the F-111 didn't hide from radar, it flew under it. The secret was the NAPQ-171, Terrain Following Radar, TFR, coupled with its revolutionary variable sweep wings. At high altitudes, the wings swept straight out for maximum lift. But when it was time to kill, the wings swept completely back to a 72.5-degree dart shape. Powered by two massive Pratt & Whitney TF-30 afterburning turbofans, the Aardvark generated a colossal 50,000 pounds of thrust. It was armed with the PAVE-TAC targeting pod, a thermal imaging and laser designation system housed in its belly. The F-111 could fly at Mach 1.2, over 900 miles per hour, at an altitude of just 200 feet. In pitch-black darkness through a monsoon, it could locate a single enemy tank using infrared, drop a 500-pound GBU-12 laser-guided bomb directly onto its turret, and vanish before the enemy even heard the engines approaching. The brutal reality, why it was terrifying to use. Flying the Aardvark meant trusting a 1960s-era analog computer with your life every single second. The TFR system automatically pitched the nose up and down to fly over mountains and valleys. If that radar system glitched for even 1/10 of a second at Mach 1.2, the 40-ton aircraft would plow into a hillside with the force of a tactical explosive. Furthermore, the F-111 was so complex it didn't even have standard ejection seats. It had an entire escape capsule. If the aircraft suffered catastrophic failure, like the early models where the massive steel wing pivot pins literally snapped in midair, the pilot pulled a handle, and explosive cord severed the entire cockpit from the fuselage. A 40,000-pound thrust. Rocket motor blasted the cockpit into the sky, and massive parachutes deployed. Pilots survived, but the brutal G-forces of rocketing a metal box into the air and slamming it into the ground often ended careers with severe spinal injuries. Number 2, the F-105 Thunderchief, the Thud. The name, Republic F-105 Thunderchief. The purpose, Mach 2 fighter bomber designed for supersonic nuclear penetration. The deep dive analysis, why it was unstoppably deadly. The F-105 was a masterpiece of brute force aerodynamics. It was built around a single, massive Pratt & Whitney J75P19W turbojet engine to get this 50,000-pound beast off the runway fully loaded. It used water injection, spraying water directly into the engine to instantly cool the turbine and increase thrust to a staggering 4,500 pounds. It was deadly because it carried an internal M61 Vulcan rotary cannon, spitting out 6,000 rounds of 20 mm depleted uranium or high explosive, incendiary rounds per minute. Originally built to carry a single B-28 nuclear bomb in an internal bay, it was repurposed to carry up to 14,000 pounds of conventional bombs on external pylons. It could drop a massive wall of fire onto an enemy rail yard and then, purely on engine power, outrun enemy MiG fighters in a straight-line dash at sea level. The brutal reality why it was terrifying to use. The F-105 was an absolute death trap because of a fatal engineering flaw: its dual hydraulic flight control systems. The hydraulic lines ran parallel to each other, side by side, straight down the belly of the aircraft. When flying through the heaviest anti-aircraft artillery AA networks over Hanoi, a single strike from a 23mm explosive shell to the fuselage would often sever both lines simultaneously. The moment those lines bled out, the massive jet lost all flight controls. The horizontal stabilizers would lock up, violently pitching the aircraft up or down into a supersonic, uncontrollable tumble, tearing the wings off under the G-forces before the pilot could even reach the ejection handle. Pilots flying the Wild Weasel variant had the most dangerous job in human history, deliberately locking onto Soviet Say-2 guideline surface-to-air missiles, SAMs, waiting for the telephone pole-sized missile to launch at them, and playing a supersonic game of chicken to destroy the radar dish before the missile obliterated them. Number 3, the F-8 Crusader, the last of the gunfighters. The name Vought F-8 Crusader. The purpose, carrier-based, supersonic air superiority and dogfighting interceptor. The deep dive analysis, why it was unstoppably deadly. The Crusader was built purely for the art of the dogfight. While the Pentagon was obsessed with early, unreliable radar-guided missiles, the F-8 was stripped of dead weight and armed with 4 20mm Colt Mk-12 cannons. It was powered by a J-57 afterburning turbojet, giving it a near 1-to-1 thrust-to-weight ratio when lightly loaded. This meant it could climb like a rocket and bleed energy in a turn faster than any Soviet MiG-17 or MiG-21. The pilot sat high in the nose with incredible visibility. It was a knife fighter in a sky full of snipers. When enemy planes tried to evade heat-seeking missiles, the F-8 pilot would drop into their blind spot, pull high Gs, and shred the enemy fuselage with a sustained burst of 20mm cannon fire. The brutal reality why it was terrifying to use. The Crusader was universally feared by its own pilots, earning the dark nickname the Ensign Eliminator, because it had to land on short aircraft carrier decks. It featured a bizarre and highly dangerous variable incidence wing. The entire wing literally detached from the fuselage and tilted upwards by 7 degrees. This allowed the wing to grab more air and fly slowly, while keeping the main fuselage perfectly flat, so the pilot could see the carrier deck. If this mechanical wing mechanism failed to lock into place or collapsed upon hitting the deck, the aircraft was doomed. Furthermore, it was completely unforgiving. It had an incredibly narrow landing gear track and a terrifyingly high stall speed. If a young pilot approached the pitching deck of a carrier at night, even 3 knots too slow, the F-8 would suddenly lose all lift and drop like an anvil. A missed arresting wire meant the plane would smash into the steel deck, erupting into a ball of jet fuel and fire. It demanded absolute microscopic perfection, or it killed you. Number 4, the A-37 Dragonfly, the Super Tweet's evil twin. The name Cessna A-37 Dragonfly. The purpose, light attack, close air support, CAS, and counterinsurgency, COIN. The deep dive analysis, why it was unstoppably deadly. The A-37 looks like a toy, but it was a hyper-lethal ground attack platform. It was powered by 2 General Electric 85GA-17A engines, the exact same engines, used in supersonic jet fighters, packed into a tiny lightweight airframe. This gave the Dragonfly an insane payload-to-weight ratio. It could carry over 5,000 pounds of ordnance, nearly its own empty weight. Its lethality came from its loiter capability and pinpoint accuracy. Fast jets would blast over a battlefield in seconds, often missing the target. The A-37 could fly in circles directly over friendly troops for hours. Armed with a nose-mounted 7.62-meter minigun and an array of napalm canisters, unguided Mk-82 bombs, and white phosphorus rockets, it could drop ordnance within 50 feet of friendly forces. It was the ultimate guardian angel for infantry, turning impenetrable jungles into scorched earth in a matter of seconds. The brutal reality why it was terrifying to use. To be deadly in the A-37, you had to fly low. We are talking 50 to 100 feet off, the deck at a slow 200 miles per hour. You had absolutely no high-tech radar, warning receivers and no electronic jamming pods. Your only defense was thin strips of nylon flak armor lining the cockpit seat. Flying the Dragonfly meant willingly flying into a hornet's nest of DSHK, DAS and some heavy machine gun fire and RPGs. The danger of target fixation was immense. Pilots would get so focused on strafing the enemy that they would fly their aircraft directly into the trees. Ground fire would routinely punch massive holes through the unpressurized cockpit, shattering the canopy and tearing into the hydraulic lines. You weren't fighting a sterile war on a computer screen. You were looking directly out the window, watching tracer rounds fly past your helmet, relying purely on raw piloting skill and extreme luck to survive the mission. Number 5, the F-104 Starfighter, the Widowmaker. The name, Lockheed F-104 Starfighter. The purpose, Mach 2 high-altitude supersonic interceptor. The deep dive analysis, why it was unstoppably deadly. The F-104 was not an airplane. It was a literal missile with a man strapped inside it. Designed by the legendary Kelly Johnson, it was built for one absolute purpose: to climb to the edge of space, faster than anything else on the planet, and intercept Soviet nuclear bombers. Powered by a single General Electric J79 turbojet engine, it produced so much raw thrust compared to its tiny size that it was the first aircraft in history to hold both the world speed and altitude records simultaneously. It was deadly because it gave the enemy absolutely zero reaction time. Armed with an M61 Vulcan cannon and heat-seeking Sidewinder missiles, the Starfighter would launch from the runway, ignite its afterburner, and rocket to 73,000 feet at Mach 2.2. It would strike with blinding speed, a supersonic dart piercing the stratosphere, delivering a fatal blow before the enemy bomber crews even registered it on their radar screens. The brutal reality why it was terrifying to use. The Starfighter earned the horrific nickname, the Widowmaker, for a reason. To achieve those insane speeds, the wings were razor-thin, literally, so sharp that ground crews had to put protective covers over the edges, so they wouldn't accidentally slice open their hands. Because the wings were so small, they provided almost no lift at low speeds. If the engine failed, which happened frequently, the F-104 did not glide. It dropped out of the sky like a solid block of tungsten. Early models had a terrifying design flaw because the tail was so high. A standard upward ejection seat would smash the pilot into the tail fin at 600 miles per hour. The solution? A downward firing ejection seat. If the aircraft had an emergency at low altitude or during takeoff, the pilot was essentially fired directly into the concrete runway, guaranteeing a brutal death. It was an uncompromising machine that demanded absolute perfection, claiming the lives of hundreds of pilots who made a single microscopic error. Number 6, the B-58 Hustler, the supersonic dart. The name, Convair B-58 Hustler. The purpose, Mach 2 high-altitude strategic nuclear bomber. The deep dive analysis, why it was unstoppably deadly. The B-58 Hustler was the most terrifyingly beautiful and lethal bomber of the early Cold War. It was the first operational bomber capable of Mach 2. It did not carry bombs inside a traditional bay. Instead, it carried a massive singular nuclear pod strapped to its belly. This pod contained a multi-megaton thermonuclear weapon and extra jet fuel. Its lethality was in its untouchable speed. The Hustler was designed to outrun interceptor fighters and anti-aircraft missiles. The crew of 3, a pilot, a navigator, bombardier, and a defense systems operator, sat in isolated tandem cockpits. They would fly this massive 4-engine delta-wing bomber at twice the speed of sound, racing across the curvature of the Earth to deliver apocalyptic destruction to enemy command centers. It was a silver spear aimed directly at the heart of the enemy. The brutal reality, why it was terrifying to use. Flying the B-58 was a high-wire act over a bottomless pit. The delta wing design meant the aircraft had to take off and land at extremely high angles of attack, completely blinding the pilot to the runway ahead. The landing speed was so incredibly fast that the aircraft routinely blew out its tires upon touching down, turning the landing gear into sparking, grinding shrapnel at 200 miles per hour. But the true horror of the Hustler was what happened if things went wrong at Mach 2. At that speed, a standard ejection seat would literally tear a human body apart in the slipstream. So the engineers designed individual clamshell escape capsules. If the bomber suffered catastrophic failure, explosive charges would slam a metal shield down over each crew member, sealing them inside a pressurized pod before blasting them out of the disintegrating aircraft. The bomber had an unforgiving accident rate. More than 20% of all E-58s ever built were destroyed in horrific crashes, taking their elite crews with them. Number 7, the A-5 Vigilante, the Carrier Queen. The name North American A-5 Vigilante. The purpose: carrier-based supersonic nuclear strike, bomber and deep penetration, reconnaissance. The deep dive analysis: why it was unstoppably deadly. To understand the Vigilante is to understand absolute, unrestrained mechanical ambition. It was a massive, twin-engine bomber designed to operate off the pitching deck of an aircraft carrier. It incorporated fly-by-wire technology, titanium structures, and gold-film windscreens long before they were standard. It was deadly because it possessed an automated, inertial navigation system that could guide it flawlessly to a target thousands of miles away without ever emitting a radar signal. As a reconnaissance platform in Vietnam, the RA-5C variant was the fastest, most elusive aircraft in the theater. It would scream over heavily defended targets, completely unarmed, relying purely on its blistering Mach 2 speed and altitude to escape the most intense anti-aircraft artillery barrages. It provided the high-resolution intelligence that dictated the entire course of the war. The brutal reality, why it was terrifying to use. The A-5 Vigilante was a mechanical psychopath. Its original nuclear delivery system was utterly insane. Instead of a traditional bomb bay that opened downward, the Vigilante had a linear bomb bay, located between its 2 massive jet engines. The nuclear bomb was attached to 2 empty fuel tanks. Upon reaching the target, explosive charges would literally shoot the nuclear weapons straight out the back of the aircraft, like a bullet from a gun. However, this system was terrifyingly unreliable. During catapult launches off the carrier, the violent acceleration would sometimes cause the nuclear payload to accidentally eject and roll out onto the flight deck, creating a near-apocalyptic panic among the crew. Landing this massive heavy jet on a carrier required a sink rate that constantly threatened to snap the landing gear in half. It was too fast, too heavy, and too complicated, a brilliant machine that constantly threatened to kill the men trying to tame it. Number 8, the F-89 Scorpion, the nuclear stinger. The name Northrop F-89 Scorpion. The purpose: all-weather twin-engine interceptor. The deep dive analysis: why it was unstoppably deadly. The F-89 Scorpion was not designed to dogfight. It was designed for total, unmitigated annihilation. As Soviet bombers grew larger and flew in tighter formations, standard machine guns were no longer enough to stop them. The Scorpion was transformed into a flying artillery battery. It became the first aircraft in human history explicitly designed to fire an unguided, air-to-air nuclear weapon. The AIR-2 Genie. The Scorpion was deadly because it possessed a weapon of absolute area denial. A single F-89 could launch its nuclear rocket into a formation of enemy bombers, and the resulting 1 kiloton nuclear fireball would instantly vaporize everything within a 1,000-foot radius, tearing the wings off any surviving aircraft with the crushing overpressure wave. The brutal reality why it was terrifying to use. The terror of the Scorpion was twofold. First, the early structural designs were dangerously flawed. The wings suffered from massive aeroelastic failure. In simple terms, if the pilot pulled too hard in a dive, the wings would literally twist themselves off the fuselage in mid-air, plummeting the crew to their deaths. Second, the psychological horror of its weapon system. The pilot and the radar operator sitting in the back seat had to manually arm a live nuclear warhead in the sky. When they fired the Genie rocket, it had no guidance system. The pilot had to pull a massive, violent U-turn and dive away at maximum speed just to outrun the nuclear blast wave of their own weapon. Firing it meant exposing yourself to a blinding flash of radiation and praying the shockwave didn't blow your own tail. Section to pieces. Number 9. The A-1 Skyraider, the flying dump truck. The name, Douglas A-1 Skyraider. The purpose, propeller-driven single-seat attack aircraft. The deep dive analysis, why it was unstoppably deadly. In an era where the military was obsessed with sleek, supersonic jet fighters. The A-1 Skyraider was an ugly, brutal, piston-engine dinosaur from the World War II era. But do not underestimate it. Powered by a massive Wright R-3350 radial engine, the Skyraider was essentially a flying main battle tank. It was deadly because it possessed a terrifying combination of payload and endurance. The Skyraider could carry up to 8,000 pounds of bombs, napalm, and unguided rockets, more than a heavy 4-engine bomber from a decade prior. It boasted 4 20mm cannons in the wings. While fast jets blew past targets in the blink of an eye, the Skyraider would circle ominously over the battlefield for up to 10 hours. It delivered close air support with a slow, methodical, and devastating precision that completely pulverized enemy positions. The brutal reality why it was terrifying to use. Flying the Skyraider in the jet age meant you were moving in slow motion through a sky filled with supersonic missiles and heavy anti-aircraft fire. Because it flew low and slow to drop its payload, it absorbed a staggering amount of punishment. The pilots had absolutely no ejection seat. If the aircraft caught fire or the massive radial engine finally died from too many bullet holes, the pilot had to muscle a burning 18,000-pound piece of metal toward the ground, either bailing out manually over enemy territory or attempting a suicidal crash landing in the jungle. They relied entirely on hundreds of pounds of steel, armor plating wrapped around the cockpit to survive. They willingly flew into the jaws of death, absorbing hits from heavy artillery that would have ripped modern jets entirely in half, just to protect the infantry on the ground. Number 10, the B-36 Peacemaker, the magnesium monster. The name Convair B-36 Peacemaker. The purpose, intercontinental strategic bomber. The deep dive analysis, why it was unstoppably deadly. We end with a machine of incomprehensible scale. The B-36 Peacemaker is the largest mass-produced piston-engine aircraft ever built. It was a flying doomsday device. It had a wingspan of 230 feet and was powered by a staggering 10 engines, 6 massive radial piston engines pushing the aircraft, and 4 jet engines in pods for a burst of speed. The slogan was 6 turning and 4 burning. It was deadly because it was the only aircraft capable of carrying the colossal 43,000-pound MiG-17 thermonuclear bomb, the first deliverable hydrogen bomb in the U.S. arsenal. The B-36 could fly from the United States, drop a megaton yield weapon on any target in the Soviet Union, and fly back without ever needing to refuel. It operated at an altitude of 50,000 feet, where the air was so thin that early jet fighters of the era literally stalled and fell out of the sky trying to reach it. The brutal reality why it was terrifying to use. The Peacemaker was a floating magnesium fire hazard. To save weight, massive portions of the airframe were constructed from magnesium alloy, a metal that burns at extremely high temperatures and is nearly impossible to extinguish. The massive engines constantly leaked oil and were prone to terrifying in-flight fires. For the crew of 15 men, the mission was an agonizing 40-hour test of physical and psychological endurance. The front and rear pressurized crew compartments were separated by an 80-foot-long bomb bay holding a nuclear weapon. To travel between them, a crew member had to lay flat on a wheeled cart and physically pull themselves through a pressurized metal tube that was only 2 feet wide. If a fire broke out at 50,000 feet or an engine exploded, the sheer terror of being trapped inside a burning magnesium cage, strapped to a hydrogen bomb, was the ultimate nightmare. We have just stared into the absolute abyss of American aerial warfare. These 10 aircraft were not just machines. They were flying death warrants. They demanded a level of raw courage, sheer terror, and absolute insanity from their pilots that simply does not exist in the drone warfare era of today. The standard history books tried to sanitize their legacies, but today we ripped the archives wide open and exposed the brutal truth. If your blood is pumping right now, and you want more of these unapologetic, highly classified deep dives that no other channel has the guts to reveal, you need to hit that subscribe button right now. Do not leave this video without smashing the like button. It signals the algorithm and tells me you demand more of this raw, unfiltered military truth. Now I want to see who the real elite viewers are. If you survived this entire briefing and watched until this very last second, go to the comments right now and type the exact number, 73,000. That is our classified code for today. Drop the number 73,000 in the comments right now so I know exactly who the true hardcore military analysts are in this community. I read every single one. Stay dangerous. Keep your eyes on the skies. I'll see you in the next briefing.